Okay.
How long have you been an expert witness?
I've been an expert witness for several years now. I've worked on quite a few court cases.
Okay. What kind of education do you have in regards to being an expert witness?
So I have a degree in my field, forensic science, and I have a degree in forensic science, then I also have a minor in criminal justice, and I have received, I have some training in how to explain technical information in court.
Okay. What kind of certification do you have in regards to being an expert witness?
So I have a professional certification that shows that I'm qualified in the area of expertise in my field.
Okay. Do you have any experience or education related to criminal justice?
Yes, I have taken various classes, criminal justice classes at school.
Okay. Do you have any experience or education related to the U.S. court system?
Yes, some of the criminal justice classes that I have taken were also relating to law, so pre-law, and in there we just learned about the U.S. court system.
Do you know how the court system works?
Yes, I know how the trials work, and yeah, I know how the trials work.
Okay. How does the court system work?
So the court system is set as an adversarial court. You have two parties presenting to a judge, and each party presents their case and their evidence and presents it to the judge, or sometimes also a jury, to come up to a verdict regarding the person in trial. And then there's civil courts and then criminal justice courts, and it's the same for either or. And then there's different stages of courts. You have your municipal courts, and then you have state courts, and then you have federal courts, and then the top one is the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay. What is your specific area of expertise?
So I specialize in forensic science, specifically crime scene investigations.
Are you familiar with the federal rules of evidence?
Yes, I know that the federal rules of evidence is a guide that allows evidence, specifically expert testimony, to be used in courts.
Are you familiar with the Daubert standard?
Yes, I know it's like a set of guidelines that helps the judge when admitting expert testimony as well as other like scientific methods into the court system.
Are you familiar with the Frye standard?
Yes. I know that before the Daubert system, judges use the Frye standards as a way to admit scientific evidence as a scientific method into courts.
How do you keep up with new information in your field?
So I attend training courses, I attend conferences, I read a lot of new research articles, things like that, just to continue with the new information that comes up in the field.
Okay. Have you written any research papers that were reviewed by other experts?
Yes, I have reviewed a good amount of research papers that were written by other experts in the field and regarding criminal justice, forensic science, and law.
Has a judge ever said you couldn't testify as an expert in a case?
No, a judge has never deemed me unqualified as an expert.
Are you a part of any professional groups related to your work?
Yes, I am a part of a few organizations that fall under forensic science and criminal justice.
What do you do to get ready before testifying in court?
I just make sure to review all my notes about the case, about my findings, review my notes, and just make sure that everything that I have written down that I still agree with, and just prepare to give my testimony in court.
Okay. How do you make sure your testimony is fair and based on facts?
I don't like to focus, I don't focus on like the personal aspects of cases. I just look at the evidence that is given to me, and I make my opinion based on those facts only, depending on the evidence that is given, because you can only draw out a certain conclusion based on the evidence. Like, for example, like fingerprint analysis, like there's an explanation for everything. Basically, you can't make anything up.
What do you think an expert witness is supposed to do in court?
So an expert witness is just there to provide their testimony to explain the disciplines of certain things in more detail than the average person knows.
Okay. Why is your knowledge important in legal cases?
It's important because it helps juries, judges, and even like the prosecution and defense team better understand the evidence that is being used in the court trials.
Okay. Now for direct questioning, do you believe the current standards and limitations are justified when allowing expert testimony?
Yes, I do believe that the current standards and limitations are justified when allowing expert testimony.
What is one standard set in place that justifiably allows expert witness testimony in court?
One of those standards would be the Daubert standards.
How does this standard allow expert witness testimony?
So the Daubert standard is just like a guideline of 5 pretty much checkpoints that allows for expert testimony to be allowed in court, and by following those, the judge makes sure that the expert witness or the evidence that is being presented follows along those guidelines.
How do standards protect against junk science in the courtroom?
So one of those standards in the Daubert standard is that the science is generally accepted within the scientific community. So as long as it's generally accepted, that means that it has been peer reviewed by these other members of the community, allowing it to be like it's actual science and not just junk science.
Okay. In your experience, do judges effectively screen expert testimony for relevance and reliability?
In my experience, yes. The judges have always asked me questions regarding my field, made sure that I, as an expert witness, follow along those guidelines.
Do you think juries understand expert testimony better because of these rules?
I do, because as an expert witness, that is our job. We are to explain the discipline in simpler terms and easy enough for anyone in the courtroom to follow along.
Why is it better to keep improving the current system instead of just starting over?
So the system already works well enough the way that it's set up. It's easier to just amend as we go instead of just starting over from scratch when this is working well enough as it is.
In your experience, do current standards work well in most cases?
In my experience, I do agree that the standards do work in a majority of the cases.
How do the current rules protect innocent people during trials?
So they only allow reliable experts to give their opinions, like, with the whole junk science thing. Like, they make sure that these guidelines are followed so people who have the proper knowledge and training and experience testify in court, and they make sure that that information that is being given in court is actually reliable.
Okay. Do the rules make it harder for unqualified people to act like experts?
They do, just because the standards do a good job at thoroughly checking through that people's experience and knowledge actually checks out. They know what they're talking about, and they're not giving false information out in courts.
Okay. For cross-examination, isn't it true?
That's not.
Okay.
Isn't it true that experts can sometimes disagree on the same set of facts?
It can be, but that's not because it means that the fact is wrong. It's just because of the scientific some scientific disciplines are very much more in-depth than what it's usually made to be out in like simpler terms.
Okay. Isn't it possible for bias to influence an expert's testimony?
Can we pause? Are we just gonna edit this out?
Yeah, we can go back in there.
Okay. Hold on.
That one's kind of a hard one.
Yeah.
What was it again?
Isn't it possible for bias to influence an expert's attorney testimony?
I guess, yeah, because everyone has bias, but
Yeah.
there's really nothing you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. So, it is possible for bias to be in an expert's testimony, but bias isn't everything that we do. So that's why we focus on just presenting the facts and making sure those facts are reliable based on the information that we are given.
Okay. How do you define objectivity in expert testimony?
So objectivity would just mean us focusing on the facts of the case, making sure that we are basing our opinion on the experience and training that we have received to get to a conclusion, and not focusing on what others are wanting us to present as testimony.
Would you admit that even under the current standards, some unreliable testimony can slip through?
Yeah, it is possible that some unreliable testimony can slip through, but that's why, the standards are set in place. And we just have to make sure that we follow along those standards to make sure that expert witnesses do check off those boxes.
Are you aware of any controversies where expert testimony led to wrongful convictions?
Yes, I do know that in past years, some wrongful convictions have been made because of some expert testimonies, but that's just why we continue to adjust the standards that are set in place to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future.
Sorry, I'm just here, you could ask her and say, so you admit that they do need updating, cause you just said,
Yeah.
To be honest, that's not.
huh? I just,
No, that'd be good, that, yeah.
And I'm like,
just that,
so based
Wait.
off of what you're saying,
You do
You
admit.
do
you
admit
do
that.
admit that the standards could be changed.
That's
that need to be updated at,
yeah.
as the times.
I need to check this out.
We're doing good so far.
Alright, so this.
You're doing great, Naomi.
How far in are we?
15 minutes.
Oh, God.
I'm kidding, I don't know.
I get to
So what,
14 minutes?
so based on what you're saying, expert testimony,
Okay.
Oh, based on,
what you're saying, expert testimony needs to be changed.
the standards for expert testimony do need to be updated.
Updated, yeah, as times change.
For expert testimony do need to be updated.
Is that helping?
That's what we're gonna go with. Alright. Scene.
It's fine.
Okay, so based on what you're saying, the standards for expert testimony do need to be updated.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they could be updated.
Isn't the Daubert standard sometimes criticized for being inconsistently applied?
I have heard some critiques about the Daubert system. But in my opinion, it still works well. It still has allowed reliable scientific evidence to be entered in court as testimony.
How would you respond to those who say the standards overly favor the prosecution or defense?
I mean, the standards are set in place for expert testimony, regardless of who is doing the hiring, the prosecution or the defense. They both still have to follow under those same principles and guidelines.
Also, in in response to that answer, I would also maybe say that, isn't it true that occasionally judges, or prosecutions or defense will choose judges based off of how they,
How they judge?
what evidence they admit.
Okay.
Through the
Yeah.
double standard, so I can write it down.
The gatekeepers, yeah. I just gotta talk slower. That's what
I
I'm.
noticed.
I ramble when nervous.
It's okay.
Keep rambling, make it longer.
Okay.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
Mine would all just be yes or no.
Yeah.
No, yeah, yours would be, and I'd be like,
Yes.
hey, so.
No. He's gonna have to be happy with what he gets. Cause I have to finish and sign.
We just turned this in raw, no editing. Okay.
Isn't it true that because the Daubert standard allows for the judge to pick when evidence is admitted, attorneys will choose their judges?
We'll choose judges, sorry.
No, it's my fault, I just can't read.
Restart.
Mhm.
Okay. Isn't it true that because the Daubert standard allows for judges to pick when evidence is admitted, attorneys will choose judges that they know will or will not allow certain testimony?
It could possibly happen, but again, like the Daubert standard is set for the judges to follow those guidelines.
Isn't it true that expert witnesses are paid for their testimony?
Yes, they are paid for their testimony, but that's to give their expert opinion, not just to give a testimony that the, whichever side is paying them for. Like, we're being paid for our time and not for, like, our opinions.
Could financial influence be the testimony of some experts?
It could be, but the Daubert standard and the judges help determining like expert witness testimony prevent that, as well as just each, both the prosecution and defense have the chance to just examine the witness expert. And so it's really just, we're paid to give the expert testimony. So even money only has a little bit of influence, and it's not a big, like it's not a huge influence.
What safeguards do you think should be in place to avoid expert overreach?
I believe that judges should ask questions, and that when we're giving expert testimony, we really only speak on the topics that we are qualified in. Okay, so redirect.
Redirect. How does cross-examination help show if an expert is biased or made a mistake?
Cross-examination allows the attorney on the opposing side question the expert witness and drawing out any inconsistencies in their testimonies, and just pointing out any like possible mistakes that could have been made, or drawing attention to like different phrasings that made things sound as things that they weren't actually.
What happens if an expert lies or gives false information in court?
So if an expert lies and false information is given, firstly, they are recognized as unreliable, not an expert, so they aren't given the chance to testify in court, or if they are, that's immediately brought into attention to the court, making their testimony unreliable and just lessening their chance of ever presenting testimony in court again.
Okay. What rules are in place to make sure expert witnesses are honest and reliable?
So we have the Daubert standard, just making sure that experts are actually qualified and experts. Their knowledge and methods and theories are recognized within the community, the scientific community. And then the federal rules of evidence also just make sure that the expert witnesses have the qualifications of an expert, so they have a vast amount of knowledge, training and experience within the field that they're being hired as an expert in. And then also just ethical standards from those professional groups. And as in court, it's like we swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
Why is it better to fix problems in the current system instead of starting over with new rules?
It's better to fix problems now, just because the problems that we do come across are just minor. They're not anything big where we need to scrap the entire system and restart.
Okay. What is your final opinion on why the court should keep using the current rules for expert witnesses?
It should keep using the current rules just because thus far it has been working in the favor of making sure that reliable expert testimony is being presented in those courts to help come to justified verdicts for criminal trials or even civil trials.
Why is it helpful when an expert's work is checked by other professionals?
This is important just because it assures that the work is actually reliable, the science checks out, there's no junk science being presented, it follows along the rules of that specific principle, nothing new is being made up that could lead to wrong conclusions and things like that.
Okay. How does your training help you give accurate and fair answers in court?
Because of the extensive training that I receive, I have a lot of knowledge within the field that I'm in. I know how to come to different conclusions, like fingerprint analysis. I know how to come to different conclusions based on the training that I receive. And because this training is also set up by other experts in the field, so that's how we assure that the training we receive and I have received in the past is correct.
Okay. How do groups you belong to help make sure you follow expert rules?
So for the trainings, we make sure to follow along the guidelines. We're making sure we're learning the correct information. If we do come to a wrongful conclusion, those training officials or other experts that are helping us in our training make sure to redirect us on the correct path so they can assure that we're still learning that correct information. And if we do make wrongful conclusions, we're learning from our mistakes. And that helps prevent it in the future as well.
Okay. Why should experts explain their opinions in a way the court can understand?
This just ensures that people in the court are following along our testimonies that we are given, because we have the experience that is needed to explain these disciplines, and they don't. So by us making it easier for them to understand, it helps them follow along and come to the right conclusions.
Okay. How do the rules encourage you to stay fair and honest?
I mean, they only let me testify if I fall under these guidelines. So, and I will only present on what I know. So that's how, like, I'm not going to like lie and make up something if I don't know. Like, I'm just presenting the evidence that I know. And so that's how, like, I just stay honest about stuff. I focus on the facts that I do know based on all the experience and training that I have received.
Okay. How does cross-examination help show if an expert made a mistake or is being unfair?
Again, like, it just lets the attorney doing the cross-examination bring attention to any flaws that they could have made in their expert testimony, or any inconsistencies that they could have brought out as well. Just draws those out, and it forces like the testifier to like address those inconsistencies on the spot.
Can you give an example of when the rules stopped bad or fake science from being used in court?
I can't think of a specific example, but I do know that it has happened.
If you wanna reference when they first implemented the Fry standard, in that court case, they ruled out, like pressure testing. They were trying to get that brought in for the Fry standard, but it was found inadmissible because it wasn't generally accepted science. It was something about like with, the testing that nobody does, like the lie detector test
Oh yeah.
and blood pressure.
Oh, yeah.
So, and this was just like for a court case where they were trying to admit that.
This is how they created the Fry standard, was because of this. They were trying to admit blood pressure. Fry
It was like
versus
something
Fry versus.
versus United States.
You can probably just look up.
Do you wanna read some of this?
Probably.
I can literally start anytime.
Yeah, they held that polygraph results are inadmissible in court in Fry versus United States. And it introduced the new Fry standard.
Also like these ones.
Oh, yeah. So it was Fry versus United States. They deemed polygraph fake
Inadmissible in court.
and inadmissible.
And it also created the Fry standard.
Okay. Yeah, so actually one example is the Fry versus United States. The experts were trying to admit polygraphic evidence in the court trials, but they deemed it as inadmissible, which that in itself actually led to the creation of the Fry standard.
Okay. Those are all of my questions.
Okay.
Can you state your name for the court?
It's Michaela Gates.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. Ms. Gates, how long have you been an expert witness?
I've been an expert witness for 2 years.
What kind of education do you have in regards to being an expert witness?
I have a bachelor's degree in forensic science and a master's in expert testimony.
Sorry, let me go. What kind of certification do you have in regards to being an expert witness?
I have been certified, I've taken courses to certify me as an expert witness.
Are you familiar with the current standards and limitations of expert witnesses put into place in the U.S. court systems?
Sorry. Where did you go? Yes, sir.
How many trainings or courses do you attend a year?
I attend about, on average, 2 a year to maintain my education in expert test.
We need to say we're going into direct.
Do you also wanna pull from some of the qualifying questions above, just to like qualify more?
Okay. Ms. Gates, do you have any experience or education relating to the criminal justice?
Yes.
Relating to criminal justice, sorry.
Yes. In my, when I worked on my degree in my bachelor's of forensic science, I took multiple criminal justice classes.
Do you have any experience or education relating to the US court system?
Yes, I have presented as an expert witness in 7 other court cases, and also as well while I was receiving my, getting my master's in expert testimony, I took multiple classes pertaining to the US court system.
Do you know how the court system works?
Yes.
Can you explain how the court system works?
Yes, the court system is surprised on multiple levels. There's the federal level, the state level, and then there are criminal and civil courts. Civil courts usually pertain to matters like property or money issues. Criminal cases pertain to matters of the law of when it is broken. Criminal courts, criminal and civil courts have multiple levels, starting on the smaller, like municipal levels, and they slowly build all the way up to the federal Supreme Court.
Ms. Gates, are you familiar with the Daubert standard?
Yes, I am very familiar with the Daubert standard. It was part of my education as an expert when I got my education for expert testimony.
So then are you also familiar with the Frye standard?
Yes, I learned about it in the same place I learned about the Daubert standard.
Okay. How do you keep up with new information in your field?
I keep up with new information in my field by consistently going to new trainings and courses throughout the year, as well as staying updated on new research performed and new published papers in the journals that I follow.
Have you any words? Okay. Have you ever personally written a research paper that was reviewed by other experts?
Yes, I have written multiple research papers that have been peer reviewed and approved by other experts.
Has a judge ever said that you couldn't testify as an expert in a case?
No, I have been able to testify in every case I've been subpoenaed to.
Ms. Gates, how do you get ready before testifying in court?
Before testifying in court, I will make sure I'm up to date on all of the current facts of the case, review my reports and any work that I had done on the case, being as it usually has happened a few years prior to the court hearing. I will also meet with my attorney and make sure that we are on the same page and gather as much information as I can relating to what I will be testifying about.
How do you make sure that your testimony is fair and based on facts?
I make sure my testimony is fair and based on facts by only using information from my reports. And when I have made those reports, I am very diligent in not introducing any of conscious or subconscious bias by limiting the facts that I know about the case to only the things that I need to know until I have come to my conclusions to avoid any bias and be as true as I can, fair and true as I can be.
As an expert witness yourself, what do you think expert witnesses are supposed to do in court?
Expert witnesses are supposed to provide a expert view or expert opinion on what occurred in a case and basically explain in layman's terms to the jury exactly what their report means and what it means in terms of the case.
Okay. Again, as an expert witness, why do you think your knowledge is important in legal cases?
I believe that my knowledge is important in legal cases because it's important to help the jury understand exactly what is going on, and how the court, or how I reached the conclusions that I reached, so that they can feel comfortable in making a decision.
Okay.
Going on to direct.
What are the standards and limitations for expert witnesses put in place, in the US court system?
Currently there are the Federal Rules of Evidence, the Daubert Standard, and the Frye Standard. But not all of these are applied to, or it depends, not each can be applied to every type of court. They are applied differently to different types of court. For example, Frye Standards are not acceptable in federal courts.
Trying to think if I should ask you anything about that. Can you get you to explain, you said role of evidence?
The federal rules of evidence.
They talked about it, but.
I don't think go over it again.
Okay, so under that, can you explain what the federal rules of evidence is for the court? Okay. Can you explain what the federal rules of evidence is for the court?
The Federal Rules of Evidence are a set of guidelines that were developed in the 1900s that, I'm trying to think of how to word this. They're a set of guidelines that will determine whether certain types of scientific evidence and scientific expert testimony will be allowed into the courtroom, based on, things like if they're generally accepted, if they can be, if they have an error rate, if they can be proven to be consistent and reliable, things like that, to provide only to help encourage no junk science in the courtroom.
What are issues with expert witnesses in court?
Issues that I have encountered, or I believe that expert witnesses have in court, are when expert witnesses that are testifying on things that should not have been admitted into court are allowed to testify on things that will eventually let me restate everything I just said.
Objection.
So the issues with expert witnesses in court is that due to the current standards and limitations, certain expert testimony is admitted into court that should not be admitted into court, due to the fact that the science has not been properly vetted and proven to be true and reliable.
In your opinion, how do the expert witness issues and the standards and limitations that are in place correlate?
The entire reason that there are expert witness issues in court of having expert testimonies that should not be allowed into court are due to a lack of proper standards and limitations.
Can you provide the court an issue that has been addressed by the U.S. courts based on expert testimony?
Yes. A very large issue that has caused a lot of cases to be brought back into question and to be looked at again is bite mark evidence. For a long time, it was admitted into court under the Frye and the Daubert standard because it was accepted in the relevant scientific community. And because of this lack of the very few and vague limitations set by these standards, bite mark testimony was allowed into court and is no longer allowed in U.S. courts due to it being debunked and proved as a junk science, and has been proven that a lot of cases defendants were wrongly sent to jail and have been proven to be innocent.
In your last testimony, you referred junk science. Can you explain to the court what this is?
Junk science is an unproven or untested fact or theory that has not, it is an unproven or untested theory that is typically presented in court as scientific fact.
Are the current standards and limitations for expert witnesses sufficient in preventing junk science from entering the courtroom?
No. As I mentioned before, the current statutes and limitations are too vague and unspecific to weed out all of the instances of junk science.
It's not just gonna be by heart.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Gates, can you explain the Frye standard to the court and how you personally believe that it is lacking?
So the Frye standard, it was developed in the early 1920s as in a case that was previously discussed by the other expert witness on whether or not polygraphs would be admitted, and they were not admitted, and this built the Frye standard of every expert testimony presented in court should be generally accepted by their relevant scientific community. The issue I take with this is that it is, first of all, not enough, like very vague and not enough rules set to allow expert testimony into court, and the rule itself is allows for, due to, the Fry standard only looking for acceptance from the relevant scientific community, oh my god, what am I trying to say?
That's so hard. It's so hard.
I know, we're like watching her typing over there.
Sorry, I'm adding all these. You're like trying to add them at the end, so it's like,
No, it's
ooh.
totally fine.
Just trying to like make it all.
Oh my god, I have a point, I swear to god.
Make it.
So honestly, as long as
Oh my
the rambling's good, because it makes
Oh,
it
yeah.
longer.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, explain the science standard. I explained the Fry standard. The Fry standard itself, where it was only expecting general accepted sentence in the relevant scientific community, is itself an issue due to the fact of not having other outside opinions, looking in, who may be unbiased to see if they also accept it.
Okay, going off what you said, is this why the Fry standard is not used in federal courts? Or is there another reasoning?
Yes, partly it is not used in courts because it was determined by them that it was not sufficient for determining admissibility of of expert testimony. It was actually replaced with the Daubert standard, which was built from the Fry standard and is a bit more explicit in their rules. But the Daubert standard in of itself does have issues as well.
Okay, going off of that, can you explain the Daubert standard and how you believe that it is lacking?
So the Daubert standard, as I mentioned, was built based off of the Fry standard, and so one of the requirements is still general acceptance in the scientific community, but it also brings in other requirements. Not many, but there are some other requirements, like if possible, a proven error rate, and that the results of the evidence are reliable and reproducible, and things like that. And the Daubert standard does, as I said, it does block a lot more junk science than the Fry standard does. But due to the fact that it is, the final decision is given to the judge, it fails because of this. Because as having the judge as the so-called gatekeeper in allowing for evidence to come in based off of these rules that they look at, that the Daubert standard sets forth for them, they may not, different judges will have different opinions on things and like how they perceive it, and so it fully will depend on what the judge thinks. And so some evidence may be admitted by one judge and some may not be, and it doesn't set a consistent standard.
Sorry, they added some questions, so I'm thinking of how to ask that. How does the standards and limitations protect juries from being misled by bad junk science?
It doesn't. The current standards and limitations, due to the fact that junk science still can get through the Fry and Daubert standard, juries may still be misled by bad junk science if the cross-examination does not weed out and find all the issues with the expert testimony.
And your expert, so bad. In your experience, do juries manage to follow along expert testimony and give a justified verdict?
Yes, well, it depends on the expert witness and how well how adept they are at explaining their, report and what they've been asked to explain to the court. And as long as the science that they have used is, proven and valid, then it will give, allow for juries to give a justified verdict.
I'm just gonna ask that next question. That says, how does that help? I don't know what that's referencing. Cause I don't feel like I could go back to anything you just said that would be like, how does that help? So I'm just gonna ask, how do you help? Ms. Gates, can you tell me, how do you help juries make better decisions and help them avoid confusion?
I help, as an expert witness, and as any expert witness should do, to do this, I will explain things in layman terms and in very easily understandable, ways, to help. As an expert witness, I work to ensure that the jury has a fully completed understanding of the topic that I have been brought to court to explain, so that they can make an educated decision.
What specific standard or limitation would you want to change and why?
I believe the biggest standard or biggest issue lies with the Frye standard. So I would encourage either the eradication of the Frye standard or a huge haul over. But due to the Daubert standard being so similar to the Frye standard, if anything, the changes should be made to the Daubert standard, and that should be, become the blanket standard across all courts, and the Frye standard should be done away with.
Ms. Gates, in your opinion, would you recommend changing the standards and limitations that are put in place now or creating a new system?
A mix of both. As I said before, I think the Frye standard should just not be used anymore, and that the Daubert standard does have good bones. It just needs to be built off of more and more relevant limitations to be set in place.
How would these limitations decide who is qualified as an expert?
These limitations wouldn't necessarily decide who is qualified as an expert, but more of like what the expert is allowed to testify on. And the way they would do that is just very specific rules and standards put into place to vet out anything that has not been sufficiently proven as a established forensic science.
Do you believe that all expert opinions should be allowed even if they are not scientifically accepted or peer reviewed?
No.
Should courts accept expert witness opinions that have not been tested or peer reviewed?
No.
Do you believe expert testimony should be based on what's popular or what's actually proven?
It should be based on what has actually been proven, as well as proven multiple times by other people, not just proven once. So in a way, also popular, but in just that it has been performed multiple times by many other parties.
So jumping back to you having the idea of creating new limitations, should someone without formal training still be allowed to testify as an expert?
No, because without formal training, you can't be deemed an expert. No one who hasn't been sufficiently trained should be allowed to act as an expert witness due to their lack of experience.
If there is no check on expert credibility, what would stop someone from claiming any authority?
Nothing. Which is why, there should be some verification on expert credibility before an expert witness is brought into court.
Thank you.
Okay, for cross-examination, isn't it true that multiple qualified experts will review each other's reports and conclusions to eliminate possible biases or mistakes?
Yes, this is true.
Isn't it true that both the Fry and Daubert standard require that the science is genuinely accepted within the relevant scientific community? And how would these standards allow for junk science to enter the courtroom?
Yes, it is true that both these standards require that the science is generally accepted within their relevant scientific communities. But due to it only the relevant scientific community being consulted, you're not getting any outside opinions on and unbiased opinions on the science due to them only asking other people who do the same thing. And so that is where junk science is able to enter the courtroom.
Wouldn't changing the rules make it easier for unqualified people to present opinions as expert testimony?
No, I don't believe so.
Would you agree that if the current system set in place had major issues, changes to the system would have been done by now?
No, I would not agree due to just how long and hard it is to get change in our court system, just because it is a long and tedious process.
If we get rid of current scientific standards, how will courts know which experts are actually credible?
By replacing them with better, more improved standards.
Could you mention the standard again for how it could be improved?
Like what standard needs to be improved? Specifically the Daubert standard could do with a lot of, well, not necessarily a lot of, the current rules that they have in place are good, but they need, they need some more clear standards to vet all evidence before it enters the courtroom.
Okay. What would you change about the current Daubert standard specifically?
I would specifically change the standard or rule in place that it must be generally accepted within the scientific community. Because of how vague that standard is, like what is generally accepted, what is the relevant scientific community, it should be much more specific in its qualifications.
If we get rid of a current scientific standard, how will courts know which experts are actually credible?
Through the new and updated scientific standards, which will vet evidence going into court, as well as the voir dire part, or when experts are qualified into court, it is on the attorney to ensure that the expert witness actually has the qualifications to be there.
Isn't there a risk that changing the rules would confuse juries more by allowing more untested evidence?
No, I don't believe so, because the rules wouldn't necessarily be changing, but more as just, they would be getting added to. And if anything, it would not allow junk science. And it wouldn't allow untested evidence into courts, ideally.
Aren't experts already required to disclose their qualifications or any potential bias?
Yes, they are.
How would new rules make the process better overall? Don't they risk making it easier to hide bias?
I think with the current, any new rules would make the process better due to how many issues there are with it. I don't think it would risk making it easier to hide bias due to the current standards in place of having peer reviewing, and more standards in place would just encourage more people to be laying eyes on something before it is presented in court.
When creating new standards, wouldn't issues still present themselves in new forms?
Yes, unforeseen issues would still happen. It is unavoidable.
Can you name a specific case where the Frye or Daubert standard actually let any junk science in?
As I referenced before, there were bite mark evidence for a long time, as well as polygraph has been allowed into court in the past, I believe. I think so. And which has been, it's a very controversial science. Polygraph is not accepted generally, I believe. So it should not be allowed into courts while it has been.
So you're not sure about polygraphic evidence that has actually been entered as evidence?
No, I'm not.
If judges act as gatekeepers under Daubert, why and how would new rules do a better job? If the current rules have already been doing it.
I believe new rules would do a better job because if you take a judge's, judges should not act as gatekeepers under Daubert, and like if new rules are put into place to act more as those gatekeepers, you'll get more consistent application and admissibility in court.
So if you believe that, who do you believe should act as gatekeepers?
I don't necessarily believe anyone should act as the gatekeeper, or more as it should be determined entirely by the rules set in place. So like if it meets all of the expectations set forth by the rules, then it is admissible. If it does not, it is not admissible, and there's no in between.
Wouldn't a gatekeeper be needed to ensure that the rules are being followed correctly?
Yes, but I wouldn't necessarily call them a gatekeeper because they wouldn't be they would be deciding if the evidence is admitted, but they wouldn't be doing it based on their opinion. It would be based on only if it meets the rules in place, and so their only part in it is to take the facts, apply them to the standards, and if they do not fit the standards, they cannot be admitted into court.
Isn't that already the current job of the judges, so-called
In a-
gatekeepers?
In a way, I believe that is what, the job should be. And that when the Daubert standard was created, that is what the idea was, but it has, evolved into something of more judges using their own opinions, guided by the rules set into place, but they use them more as suggestions, and they will ultimately use their own opinion to decide whether or not something is admitted, which will then have the issues of having, some judges will allow certain evidence in and some judges will not, and it's very inconsistent.
Can you name one example of how changing the court's current standards will prevent these future issues?
Changing the current standards, if they had been updated in years prior, when bite mark evidence was first presented to court, I believe that it would have never made it past the, made it past the standard and been admitted into court.
Okay, and with that, isn't odontology a more defined discipline during this present day?
Can you elaborate on your question?
More research has been done regarding this discipline, in regards to also bite mark.
That research,
For example, if it is used for identification methods in autopsy.
so I think what you're referencing is that dental records are used for identification, which are very different than bite marks.
They are both a part of the same discipline, are they not?
They are part of the same discipline, but they are different, applications of the discipline. Cause the dental records are an examination, are much more unique to a person than a bite mark in the skin or in wherever the bite mark is left, whatever medium the bite mark is left in. And it has been proven that bite marks are too ununique. They are not. I don't know the word. That they cannot be identified back to the same person consistently enough to be used as a scientific fact or for identification methods.
Okay, so if dental records are unique to one person, wouldn't their bite mark also be unique to the same person?
No, because you cannot get the same, oh my god, I think I would word this. So dental records are unique to one person because you can see, much more. There is much more data there. Bite marks are much less data. You can only see like if they're missing a tooth. You can kind of see like how their teeth are laid out if you have that much of a bite mark. But you can't see like if they've had cavities, and you can't see if they've had root canals, and you can't see all of these things that you can see in a dental record that are very unique and that can be identified to a person. Then with a bite mark, you're getting much less information.
Well, do you even have any experience, education, training in forensic odontology? Are you an expert in that?
I am not an expert, but I did take some. I took a class we got my forensics degree.
Are these qualified classes?
Yes.
Shelby said if she's not an expert, we're good.
If current rules already have peer review and accountability, what specific problem would new rules solve?
So peer reviews are really, can only do so much. It's kind of the same issue of having the generally accepted and relevant scientific community, because peer reviews are typically done by someone who is also in that same field, and so that they will have a lot of similar opinions to you, and while they may eliminate bias in other ways, it will not eliminate issues that they may not see. And so the new rules would hopefully hold the sciences more accountable.
Earlier you stated that juries can be misled if cross-examination doesn't weed out the issues with expert testimony. Can you assure that juries haven't been misled in your initial expert testimony as a beginner expert testifier?
Sorry, I'm gonna think. No, I cannot be sure. But that is why the cross-examination does take place, to hold me accountable, hold all expert witnesses accountable.
If new issues are discovered, would the system be changed again and again?
I think it is something that should be continuously updated as more sciences are discovered and created. I think it is just gonna be something that needs to be continuously updated.
Would continuous amendments of the current system lead to further confusion or lead to possible future overlooked issues in the system as a whole?
I'd say yes, that is a possibility.
Well, how would you prevent that?
I think change is necessary regardless of what possibly could happen in the future due to the change, because of how many issues we currently have. So regardless of what may possibly happen, it's better to deal with those as they come along and continuously be making efforts to improve than just to stay stagnant.
Okay, that's all I have. Okay. Alright.
Ms. Gates, can you tell me why it would be better to encourage new standards and limitations to be set, and why our standards and limitations that are in place now need to change?
I believe it's, sorry, one second.
Good.
I think it's important to encourage new standards and limitations to be set or just updated, because times are constantly changing. Science, forensic science is rapidly expanding and updating every decade. It's exploded in the last couple of decades, and so I think it's important to continuously be updating these standards and limitations right along with it.
Would you say that the current standards and limitations in place accommodate the changing world around us?
No, I would not say that they currently accommodate the changing scientific standards.
In your opinion, why is the criminal justice system the hardest to change with the limitation and standards that have already been put in place?
I believe it's so difficult to change because it is such a controversial topic where some people are very okay and believe that the current standards are sufficient, and some do not believe so. And so it's very difficult and slow to change when you don't have a united front in changing. And it's also a very complicated system that requires a lot of forethought before change is made.
Ms. Gates, how has your training as an expert witness, been able to help you avoid personal bias in your analysis as an expert here today? Because everyone has personal bias.
My trainings help me be very aware of what my personal bias is, whether it is subconscious or conscious bias. And so by being aware of that, I am extra vigilant in ensuring that my conclusions that I come to as an expert witness are not affected by that bias. I'm also subjected to the same peer reviews that every expert witness is subjected to also eliminate as much bias as possible.
Okay. While you were not an expert in some of the questions that were asked by the other team, would you say that you have up-to-date knowledge on what is happening in the forensic field, thus allowing you to form and give an opinion?
Yes, I believe that I am very up to date in knowledge on generally what is happening in the forensics field, due to my consistent trainings and courses that I've taken over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Ms. Gates.
Hopefully it was long enough.
What are we at?
50.